All right. Should we get to Tom?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So I took Greg DeMoore's book, The First Wild Man of Sport. Is that what it's called? Or his Spectacular Rise and Fall with the
Yeah,
original
that's
copy.
right. Yeah.
And I've taken notes out of it, and we're going to go through Tom's life. And I just want to have a chat to you about things that happened and things that did as we go through. All right.
Yep.
Go. So Tom Wills was born on August 19th to Horatio and Elizabeth Wills on the Molonglo Plain near modern-day Canberra in New South Wales. So he wasn't a Victorian.
No.
He was baptised at St Andrew's Church in Sydney, and he was named after William Wentworth. Do we know who William Wentworth is?
Yes, I know who William Wentworth is.
Yeah.
William Wentworth is one of the uh, lauded Australian explorers, um, Blaxland, Lawson, and Wentworth, who found their way across the Blue Mountains.
Mm.
But they never said that they were actually shown the way by a couple of blackfellas.
Really?
Yeah, they were, and then my grandfather told me this, and but Wentworth hated Aboriginal people, and he wouldn't give any credit. And Wentworth,
Because he wanted the notoriety of being the explorer, yeah?
he
I've got a
was the
note
brave explorer, and
Yeah.
when it was suggested that Aboriginal people should have the right of giving evidence in court, he Wentworth said, "You might as well have the gibberings of an orangutan."
Mm.
That's what he thought about Aboriginal people. So Thomas Wentworth Wills, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit contradictory for who he was. But I've got here that he was a newspaper editor, a lawyer, a politician, and an author who became one of the most powerful figures in early colonial New South Wales, and he was really wealthy.
Absolutely.
So yeah, but so to be named after him is interesting. But I guess he was born in 1790 and died in 1872. So he must have been a hero of
Oh,
Horatio.
well, he opened up the whole interior when they found, into the Murray-Darling Basin. It was all new area opening up for settlement, and the governor immediately, opened it up, and then the Wiradjuri people didn't like this, and there was the Bathurst War that then went, which is hidden in the pages of history. People are becoming more aware of it now. But martial law was declared, and they had a war against the Wiradjuri people. Wiradjuri is up, sort of the other side of the Blue Mountains in northern New South Wales.
Yeah. Okay, so there's not much information about him from age 1 to 4, but we know that he was prone to illness at the age of 4 and he nearly died. At 5 years old, he moved to the district of Port Phillip in Victoria. His family and a party of stockmen drove 1,000 head of sheep and 500 bullocks to Victoria, and they stopped at Mount Ararat, which Horatio named and recorded in his diary. He says, "And here, like the ark, we rested." What's the significance of Ararat?
Well, Ararat was where Noah, after he built the ark, floated for 40 days and 40 nights, or whatever it was. But the Hebrew word for 40 just means a long time. Anyway, the first land he sighted was at Mount Ararat.
That's why that's why it was the first mountain.
So
this
is the new. Yeah. This is land, But it's interesting that it's called Port Phillip because Ararat's a fair way from what we think of as Port Phillip, but that's the name of the colony.
So the party made a semi-permanent camp near Mount William, and they lived in the tents for over a year. What were these tents like back then?
Oh, these tents were actually quite luxurious. There was a big business in Britain making tents, and when the first fleet came out, they had 2-story tents and all sorts of things.
2-story?
Yeah. They have the pre-made frameworks, and and the canvas was of high quality and all that. Certainly they were canvas tents, but they weren't just like your tent down at Rosebud.
Okay, we're getting the good stuff. We're getting the stuff
you're
from
getting
Anaconda
the regal tents,
Yeah. So just shortly after they settled there, Horatio was implicated by the Aboriginal protector named Robinson in the murder of some Indigenous Australians. The first one, he says, was in retaliation for someone trying to have a connection with his wife, and the second for murdering a shepherd in the overseer's hut. His father blamed what he called distant predatory tribes, not the local chaperone mob whom lived near the station with him. In a letter to the governor in March, he wrote of his dealings with these distant predatory tribes, and this is what he said. Occasionally, however, for the last 12 months, our stations have been plundered, our stocks driven off, and our men attacked by them. In my own case, I took no steps to prevent the loss of property. Still, from property, life was threatened. My shepherds rushed by the natives, and threats of bloodshed held out by them. I then thought it high time to interfere. Strong parties from distant tribes have made their appearances, and the lives of my people have been openly threatened and attempted. Now, as I frequently, at the hazard of my own life, use means to effect a good understanding with the natives in my immediate vicinity, I do not feel myself called upon to venture it again unless with arms in hands to restrain the lawless and sanguinary incursions of distant predatory tribes. So, in relation to the idea, also in the same letter, he talks about Aboriginal missions. So you can see that he's sort of looking after the crew that's around him, but also these what he's calling distant predatory tribes. He says he's going to shoot them. Basically, that's what with arms in hands means. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, with the idea of an Aboriginal mission, he says, "Let the blacks have the country unmolested to range upon, but I trust that such a hurtful system of extensive reserve will not be persisted in." So he was against the Indigenous missions.
Yeah. Look, he was a fine human being, and the fact that he was involved in killings has been misinterpreted slightly. There's a number of facts. First of all, Aboriginal society generally was in chaos at that time after the smallpox plague of 1789 had swept through and killed 90% of the population. At least 2.5 million Australians were killed by smallpox. And that just didn't kill everybody. It killed anybody under 6 was dead. Anybody over 60 was dead. Any pregnant woman was dead. So the survivors did not represent the proper profile of normal community. In other words, there were much less women. So therefore, wife stealing from other tribes came into vogue. The tribes had previously complex systems of diplomacy between them, which meant that and warfare itself was not deserving of the title compared to European wars, which were mass slaughterhouses.
Yeah, I remember reading in Jimmy Dawson's book, it was like, give me your best man, I'll give you my best man. They can do it out.
Yeah,
Whoever
that's
wins
right.
is...
Or they all meet and say, look, we've had trouble between our tribes. Let's have a pitched battle. First person to fall on the ground and bleed ends the thing, and then we have Jindy Warraback. We all have a get together and we have peace. And if anybody dared break the peace, the kidney fat man executes you. So they had really complex systems that worked well until the smallpox plague. And so part of what the settlers saw was not pristine Aboriginal society. It was a society in chaos, with wife stealing and abduction and all that sort of stuff going on, and intertribal relationships breaking down. And so there were distant predatory tribes, incursing onto others, and Wills, Horatio knew, as he said, look, Aboriginal people should be able to range across their own country and we shouldn't be herding them onto missions, basically. So he had a proper understanding, but also he was a man of authority and decisiveness, and he knew and that he had to protect the Aboriginal people that were around him to protect his family. And so therefore, he took action as it should. That doesn't mean to say he's a murderer or cold-blooded murderer, that sort of stuff. There are plenty of settlers who were, mind you.
Yeah. Well, Tom's cousin, H.C.A. Harrison, or Colden Harrison as he's known, he also commented in his autobiography, Running with the Ball, about these hostile tribes, and he says the following: "Sulky Jimmy was one of the blacks who showed by his demeanour most resentment against the invasion of the whites. He was very fond of one of the babies in the camp and always slept with it on his chest. This habit saved his life when early one morning the camp was attacked by a hostile tribe. The spear was driven through the body of the innocent babe, and he got off with a slight wound. So that kind of shows that those hostile tribes did exist.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, relationships were breaking down all over. And the role, when you think, one of the first things that happened with the smallpox plague is every person over 60 died. That means a whole generation of elders, both male and female, were suddenly wiped out, and a new generation of elders had to take over before their training had finished.
Yeah, okay.
So there's immediately there's cultural knowledge lost, and there's intertribal relationships strained. When suddenly there's every child under 6 died, so there and more, and all pregnant women died. So
We worry
therefore,
about COVID.
there's a generational gap in wives being available, and men were usually 10 years older than the women. Girls got married at 14, and a man would be 10 or 12 years older because they had to be an established hunter and provider before they were allowed to get married. Now, all of a sudden, there's no women to marry. There's a complete dearth of a whole generation. So that, and historians and anthropologists haven't looked at the human impact that this sort of stuff had on Aboriginal communities. They assume automatically that what was happening was the natural state of affairs. It wasn't at all.
Yeah. So in March, same year, 1841, it's noted that Mr. Wills speaks well of the natives congregated at his station. They have been with him for several months and make themselves very useful. It was also noted that Wills supplied the natives with food twice a day and was proficient in speaking Japarong. And that's by the same guy who implemented him in the murders, Robinson. In 1842, Tom's 7 years old now, and at the end of the year, the Wills family settled at a large property named Lexington near present-day Moyston, an area used by the Chaparong indigenous mob as a meeting place. And Horatio Wills, in his diary, stated, "This land, for some considerable time back, an area of general rendezvous." So they lived in an area where the Chaparong mob probably held meetings and corroborees.
Yeah, and the Chaparong themselves were at the crossroads virtually of 5 different nations of people.
The Hopkins River was the...
Yeah, and the Hopkins River went all the way from the coast right up, I suppose it wanders a couple of 100 miles, and
some of the tributaries are actually on the Lexington.
Yeah, but station. The Mara people to the down Warrnambool way, Do
you want to just tell everyone what you mean by Mara?
Oh, well, Mara, Aboriginal collections of tribes had one shared name for human beings, and in the Melbourne area the word was Kulin. It means the civilized people or the human beings, and the word Mara in the Western District meant human beings. It's interesting, in Chaparong it's very similar to Kulin. It's Kulai. And as I say, there's various, the Watchabalik people, and there's so the Chaparong had to be their geographic situation. You could guarantee that they were diplomats, that they knew how to relate to a lot of different people because they were bordered by a whole lot of different people, and the song lines.
They also got that great mountain behind them. That's
and also the road through to Stawell, where Bunjil's Cave is. The Prince's Highway was an important songline that went all the way from Gippsland through, and people from Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia did pilgrimages to Bunjil's Cave at Stawell.
A lot of eagles around that area.
Well, that's right, So the Chaparong people, as I said, were at sort of the centre of a lot of trade routes and and all that sort of stuff. So they had to be skilled diplomats.
Yeah. So during this time, up until 1849, Tom became a close friend of the local chaperone mob. According to a family member, Horace, Tom was, in his words, thrown much to the companionship of Aborigines, having no boy friends of his own age. Tom's cousin H.C. Harrison noted in his autobiography, Running with the Ball, Tom's connection with the local mob and an eyewitness account of attending these corroborees. So you're a little kid, you got no friends to play with, but you got all these little Indigenous kids all, living just like on the same place as you. You're going to play with them,
and
obviously.
this is where Tom Wills's background mirrored that of my great grandfather, Tom and Willie Chivers. And they, like him, they learnt the language immersed in life. So I see the parallels there, and I think, Tom Wills must obviously had the same experiences and much of the same thought processes that went behind that sort of stuff. And,
ironically, with the same name.
Yeah, well, that's right, and they had the same
Willie.
name. Yeah. And so it was a great parallel for me, and it gave me an insight, I believe, into Tom Wills's thinking.
Yeah. So this is what H.C. Harrison wrote. He said, "We occasionally witnessed a corroboree. This entertainment was to the blacks what we should call a party, as it is generally attended by the whole tribe. It was always held at night by the light of big fires. The men used to prepare for it by decorating their bodies with white chalky stripes. During the dance, the lubra,
as female women,
would sit together at the side, all cross-legged, with their possum skins rolled tightly in their laps, which they would beat with their open hand in time with the dance, singing a monotonous sort of chant all the time. The men used to stand together, perhaps in a couple of rows, holding their boomerangs and nulla-nullas in their hands and making a great noise banging them together in regular time. They jumped about in all sorts of grotesque attitudes, shaking their knees in a peculiar way, and at the same time thumping their sides with their elbows, emitting their breath with a loud, puffing noise. The small boys, not yet promoted to carrying waddies, used to stand in the front and beat sticks together. Added to this, occasional boisterous laughs and shrieks would be heard, showing the general excitement and enjoyment. To the spectator, it was a weird and fascinating exhibition, but it always had a certain form and meaning, and at the same time showed that the blacks had a strong sense of rhythm and an idea of singing." And here's where the interesting part comes in. "My cousin, Tom Wills, at Lexington, was clever at picking up their songs, which he delivered with a very amusing imitation of their voice and gestures, and could speak their language as fluently as they did themselves, much to their delight."
Yeah, and this would have impressed elders.
Well, by your knowledge, what we've just talked about before, knowledge is aptitude is rewarded with knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah. And memory is prized above all. And if you can replicate, and if you show when an Aboriginal person, I'm going to tell you something, and then you show the ability to absorb it and reflect it straight away, then you are esteemed and you are prized as an individual, and you are given more knowledge because you've shown you deserve it.
It's almost like you age quicker in their sense. Imagine a kid in prep doing maths at a year 8 level.
Yes, that's exactly right.
We would still keep him in prep, but
Yeah, that's right.
So this is where Jimmy Dawson comes in, and this is what I found probably the correlation between these two is really interesting. So in Jimmy Dawson's book, he describes corroborees, and I just want you to have a think about some of the similarities between these. Well, they're not similarities; they're nearly identical. So before the corroboree commences, which is immediately after sunset, large quantities of dry bark, branches, and leaves are collected, and the young people are ordered to light the fire. The men and well-grown boys retire to prepare themselves for the dance. They paint their bodies and limbs in white stripes in such a manner that gives them the appearance of human skeletons.
Yeah.
And they tie around their ankles a number of leafy twigs which touch the ground and make a rustling noise as they move. Each dancer wears a reed ornament in his nose. When they stand in a row, these reeds have the appearance of a continuous line. The women do not join in the dance, but sit in a half circle behind the fire and sing and accompany their songs with the sound of beating on opossum rugs as described under the head of music, which he talks about earlier. Some of the men stand beside the fire, beating in time with music sticks.
Yeah.
So this description by H.C. Harrison is the exact description as
Exactly
Jimmy
right.
Dawson.
And the interesting thing also is that is the same over the whole of Australia. Dancing styles only vary at the margins, knee shaking and clapsticks and all this sort of stuff. The basic music and dancing style is the same all over Australia, which shows that their cultures were integrated. That a lot of people, a lot of historians believe Aboriginal people never left their own land and all that sort of stuff for fear of getting killed. Rubbish. The fact that they shared the concept of the dreaming is Australia-wide, that they shared basic commonalities in the structure of their society and their culture.
Was it you who was telling me that there's a song line from every reach of Australia to Uluru?
There would actually be, yes. Whether it's direct or not, yeah. But I know that the longest song line I know goes from Uluru all the way to Byron Bay, which is the most easterly point of Australia.
Oh, it's the fishing story.
It's 3,500 kilometres,
yeah.
And it would take 4 months to walk there. And the reason why people from Byron Bay went to Uluru was to look at Uluru, of course. And the reason why people from Uluru went to Byron Bay was to see the ocean. And explorers could not believe it when Aboriginal people in the desert knew that Australia was an island and that it didn't matter what direction you went, you would always get to the sea.
Yeah. So in Jimmy Dawson's book, just after it talks about the corroboree, it says here, games are held usually after the great meetings and corroborees. One of the favourite games is football, in which 50 or as many as 100 players engage at a time. The ball is about the size of an orange and made of opossum skin. You've got one here. With the fur outwards. It is filled with pounded charcoal, which gives solidarity without much increase in weight, and is tied hard round and round with kangaroo sinews.
Sinews, yeah.
Being
from the tail of the kangaroo.
So like the hairs, yeah?
The inside, the gristle.
So you mean like the leather, like this, like a ripped piece of their skin?
Like tendons.
Ah, okay. That's gross, but okay. The players are divided into two sides and ranged in opposing lines, which are always of different class. White cockatoo against black cockatoo, quail against snake and sea, whatever that means. So this idea of class, we'll talk about that in a sec. Each side endeavours to keep possession of the ball, which is tossed a short distance by hand and then kicked in any direction.
Yeah.
The side which kicks it oftenest and furthest gains the game. The person who sends it the highest is considered the best player and has the honour of burying it in the ground till required the next day.
Yeah.
So it matches Colden's, the two that match Colden's description of corroborees, Dawson's description of corroborees, and then we know that after them, these games were played.
Yes.
So if he saw the corroboree, what are the odds that he saw the games being played the next day? A kid who loves playing games.
Oh, it's impossible for him not to have seen the games. It's impossible for him not to have played the game because, as I said earlier, it was a normal part of everyday life. What are the kids going to do? Oh, look, we'll go and kick the footy, and it was just a normal part of life in Aboriginal society, in every Aboriginal society.
Well, I guess that's what happens, isn't it? Because we play football on a Saturday, but during the week, you still hang around and kick the ball with your mates.
Well, that's right. Australian rules football is a socially integrative game, and the Aboriginal version, Marngrook, as we now all know it.
What was it called in Chaperong?
Mingorm.
Mingorm, that's right. Mingorm.
Yeah. It was exactly the same. It was a socially integrative game. When tribes met, they didn't say, tribe A against tribe B. They would merge. All tribes were divided into those two moieties we talked about before, black cockatoo and white cockatoo. So when you came together, you would break up into the moiety groups and play the moiety. So
and
and
possibly pair, like what
yes,
you're.
absolutely, you would be paired up with somebody. What would happen is you'd spend the morning introducing yourself to your cousins from the other tribes and all that, trying to find somebody the same height, weight, and it had to be the same marriage class. When all groups are divided, all tribes are divided into two halves and four quarters, and those four quarters are called skin groups. And the relationship, each one of those four skin groups has a class relationship with each one of the other three.
I'll put your diagram up on the screen at this
Yeah.
point in time. So keep going.
And so therefore in the morning it's meeting people, greeting people, finding out, and you have to marry across, and you have to play against the same group that you marry into, and that's the same group that the children from your mother's brothers and the children from your father's sisters belong. It's all sort of brain hemorrhage territory for non-Aboriginal people.
It is. You called it, instead of hierarchies, you called it to me when we were talking about it, a matrix, yeah?
It's a matrix, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
When you have a separate relationship with each of the other three, and these relationships, they're 6 class relationships altogether, which is a pairing. It's a binary matrix. It's actually the world's first computer system, because Aboriginal society is worked on a binary matrix. And it's very hard for Europeans to understand, but Aboriginal people think automatically in these computer terms. Come to think of it, Aboriginal people would probably be very good as computer programmers, because they have a natural understanding of binary matrices. So the morning is spent socialising. To non-Aboriginal people, it seems like aimless socialising, but it's categorising everybody, finding out how you relate. And you'll notice in the explanation it said they line up, they have lines of players. And this is the sort of thing that Tom Wills introduced into Australian rules football. Positional play, forward positional play, lines of players, all that sort of stuff. You can see, although it's not explained as that, you can see the implications of how Australian rules developed, and how Tom Wills helped develop Australian rules was based on his experience of Marngrook or Mingorm.
Or Mungut.
Or Mangurt.
Yeah, Mangurt is how he's written there. So I've got a few descriptions of this game being played all over Victoria and on the borders of Victoria and New South Wales. This one's by Alfred Howard, and it's in his book Message Sticks, I think it's called.
Yeah.
So is it Berwick? Is that how I say it?
Yes, William Berwick, yeah.
Berwick gave the following illustrations to the practice, which I quote as nearly as possible in his own words. And this is what he said. Suppose being, now how do I say this?
Angarangata.
Headman.
Yeah.
I desire to call the people from all round to come to corroboree and for ball playing. So he's saying corroboree and ball playing in the same sentence.
Exactly.
So these are synonymous with each other.
Exactly.
Is that the right word I'm using?
And that's as I said, because Marngrook was a prime tool of integrating people, and it was what they all played. It was an integrative tool.
He continues, and Howard puts a note here for ball playing, and he says, this game of ball playing was also practiced among the, now is it Kurnai?
Gunai, Kurnai.
The Walgal.
Yeah.
The
Watchabalik. That's the Western Victoria, the other side of the Chaparong.
As well as by the Woiwurrung, and was probably known to most tribes of southeastern Australia. The Kunai made the ball from the scrotum of an old man kangaroo.
They called it Dirk.
Dirk, okay. Imagine if that's what we called football, Dirk.
My great-grandfather, Tom Chivers, used to make Dirks from a pig's bladder.
Yeah, right. And is it like a ball?
The kangaroo bladder and the pig's bladder are very round.
Right.
They're like a ball. And so when you cut it out, all you do is blow it up and then tie it off, and the kids kick it around.
So the Woiwurrung made it of tightly rolled up pieces of opossum skin, and it was called by them Mangruk.
Absolutely.
In this tribe, two divisions, Bunjil and Wa, played
Ye-
on opposite sides.
Yep.
The Wotjobalek, is that I'm saying it right?
Yep.
Wotjobalek also played this game with Kurakich on one side
Yes.
and Gumach.
That's black
Gamutach.
cockatoo, white cockatoo.
Oh, is it really? Okay. The Mangruk was sent as a token of friendship from one to another.
Absolutely. And that, as I said, it represents the integrative function that Mangruk had, because to play it, you had to all come together, and you weren't defined as tribe A and tribe B. It was black
Bunjil,
cockatoo, white cockatoo.
Bunjil and Wa, yeah, black cockatoo, white cockatoo. Cool. The next one I've got's by, I think it's Peter Beveridge. Is that his first name, Peter?
I think so.
A P Beveridge I've written. So ball playing is another game which they are exceedingly partial. This game, they make much more.
And the words exceedingly partial are important. They were. It was such a vital part.
So yeah, so you're saying that this is just as important as the corroboree.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yep. This game, they make much more boisterous and noisy than they do the wrestling bouts. But notwithstanding this, it results in very much fewer serious mishaps. The women participate in this game as well as the men. I have seen as many as 200, including both sexes, engage in this game at one time. The ball is composed of an old opossum skin tightly rolled up and covered with a fresh piece of skin firmly sewed together with opossum tail sinews, ligaments. That's crazy. Before they begin to play, they arrange sides, each side having a captain whose place it is to guide and control his oftentimes unruly squad.
And I think that's important to note, that the captain is not only controlling the play, but it was the captain who could give free kicks, but only against their players.
Okay. When all is in order, the Lior or Luyur,
Lior, yeah.
Lior is
a female elder.
Female elder. Starts off with the ball in her hand. She walks a little way out from her own side and towards that of her opponents, drops the ball with seeming carelessness, but ear means before.
Yeah.
But ere it has time to reach the ground, she gives a dexterous and by no means gentle kick, which, correctly aimed, sends the ball spinning high into the air. Thereupon the fun begins in downright earnest. Such screaming, jumping, and frothing at the mouth by reason of the excitement, I am certain, was never seen at any other game outside the walls of Bedlam. And then again, such intermingling of limbs, brawny and bronze, nude and glossy, or such auteur, O-U-T-R, accentuated E, groupings were never yet beheld. Yeah. Under any circumstances other than those attended upon an Aboriginal ball match. They have not any appointed goal to which the ball has to be driven. The whole of the play merely consists of keeping the ball in motion and preventing its coming to the ground, whilst the struggles of the game all tend to keep the ball from being captured by the opposite side. Those holding the ball throw it from one to the other of their own side, and it is whilst this is going on that non-possessors strenuously run and jump to intercept it in its flights. That must have looked amazing. As the eyes of the players are never by any chance bent on the ground, tumbles during the game are numerous and frequently ludicrous. More especially when one goes down and so becomes a stumbling block over which a dozen or more come toppling in a heap. Sounds like stacks on.
Yeah.
These incidents, however, add mirth unto the fun without creating the least ill temper. Ball playing is frequently kept up from noon until dark, and even at the late hour it is given up with reluctance. So they obviously love playing it.
When the sun sets, it's over.
Yeah. The many laughable incidents which occur during the game provide ample matter for conversation round the campfire, besides affording abundant opportunity for high, now this is an interesting word, Fecond accentuated E, fecond,
I'm
I'm
not
not sure
sure.
what that means. I have to look that one up. I'll put it up on the screen if I work it out. To which they are particularly addicted, both old and young. In fact, it is a trait characteristic of these people. There's a lot in that.
Yeah, look, it shows that the purpose of the game is to enjoy yourself and put on a good show. It's not about winning. It's not about winning. It's about participating, enjoying, socializing, because the your immediate opponent is somebody that will probably be a future brother-in-law or sister-in-law.
Cousin, yeah.
It's that sort of relationship. So you've got to make sure you and because the ball is the object, anything that happens in the nobody is injured, nobody's dispossessed of the ball. There's no tackling or anything like that. The ball is the total object. Keeping the ball in the air, keeping the ball off the ground is the vital ingredient of it, and enjoying yourself and putting on a good show.
The next one I've got is William Blandowski.
Blandowski, yeah?
Blandowski. His image, which I'll put up on screen.
Wilhelm Blandowski.
Wilhelm, sorry. In his notes for the picture, he's written, a group of children is playing with a ball. The ball is made of typha roots of the bulrush. It is not thrown or hit with a bat, but is kicked up in the air with a foot. The aim of the game, never let the ball touch the ground.
And that's the clue. That's the clue. You keep the ball in the air. And everybody has to cooperate in keeping the ball in the air. And from that simple explanation, you get the obvious rules that you're not allowed to do anything that makes the ball come to the ground.
William Cawthorne is the next, is it right? Cawthorne?
Yes.
He's got an image that he has drawn. It says here, in 1855, William Anderson Cawthorne illustrated a series of images documenting South Australia's Indigenous people, including a pair of playthings, one being a sling and the other being a ball, referred to in Kunara language as pando.
Pando, yeah.
And you can see the ball looks exactly the same as your one that you've got there.
Exactly.
The next one is by William Thomas. And this says, this is his account of seeing the game. The men and boys joyfully assemble when this game is to be played. So we've got that assembly thing again.
Yeah.
So we're seeing the correlations between all of them coming together, just like your thesis.
Yeah, that's right. Now, and the point that he says assemble means that it was a systematic, sort of development of people, of spacing themselves out. A lot is implied in just that, just simple use of words.
One makes a ball of opossum skin, same thing, or the like, of good size, somewhat elastic but strong and firm. It is given to the foremost player or some other one of mark who is chosen to commence the game. He does not throw it as the white man might do, but drops it at the same time, kicks it with his foot, using the instep for the purpose.
Which is the top of the foot. Some people think it's the side of the foot. No, it's the top of the foot.
Well, it's in. It kind of means in is close to inside. You can see how they get confused. Yeah. It is thrown high in the air and there is a rush to secure it. Such a rush as is seen commonly at football matches among our own people. The tallest men and those who are able to spring to great height have the best chances in this game. Some of them will leap as high as 5 feet or more from the ground to catch the ball. The person who secures the ball kicks it again, and again a scramble ensues. This continues for hours, and the natives never seem to tire of the exercise. So that's another account that matches all the other accounts we've had so far, except for probably the beverage one where it says they threw it more than they kicked it, but it did start with
Well, I
kick.
think the implication is that they did kick it, and that, Beveridge was just a little bit brief in his description.
Possibly, yeah. This one is probably the one that paints the biggest picture, and this is an Alfred Howard interview with a man named John Connolly.
Oh, yes, I know one of his descendants.
Oh, really?
He lives just near, only about a mile away from me.
Okay. He was a Muckjarrawunt.
Yes.
Muckjarrawunt man, which is part of the
Botchabellic.
Botchabellic, which is right next
Horsham.
to Chopperong.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And it's the only recorded account of someone who actually took part in this ritual practice.
Yeah. The problem with the Botchabellic is that they adopted their moiety systems on the female um, lineage. Well, lineage is not the right word, but a lot of look, it's anyway. It's back to front from a lot of the others. So when I looked at the skin group definitions, it only makes sense if the moiety systems are actually on the flesh relationship, which is the mother-child relationship. But anyway, that's a
no. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, because that's a really interesting, this idea of you've said it to me before: flesh, skin,
spirit, and skin.
and skin. Yeah.
Well, it comes from the concept that when the world was created by the Supreme Being, life was sent into the dream to make it real, and all the dreaming was broken up into a giant jigsaw puzzle of a million pieces, and each of these creator spirits carried a piece of it. And when they finished their creation works, they became the landmarks and animals we see today. Only human beings were left with consciousness and free will. The Supreme Being, to make sure that human beings could do their custodial tasks of looking after this world that had been created, two things were done. First, the spirits of all children were seeded into the land and the dreaming. So children's spirits pre-exist. And the other thing that was done with it, all knowledge, the answer to every question was seeded into the dreaming as well. So that human beings, because each person has been directly created by God, every living person is created by God in the dreaming. That means that we have a personal connection to original creation and to all knowledge through our own personal dreaming. So that so a man has to dream the finding of a child's spirit before it's born and direct it to the body of their mother, who makes their flesh. And then when the child is born into the real world, their skin is the package that keeps spirit and flesh together in the real world. So spirit represents the father-child relationship because he finds your spirit. The flesh represents the mother-child relationship because she makes your flesh. And the skin represents the husband-wife relationship because they give you family and community. So all tribes have this matrix of relationships between father-child, which is the spirit, mother-child, which is the flesh, and skin, which is the husband-wife. And when faced with depopulation from smallpox, a lot of tribes had to adjust their relationships. Most of the moiety relationships that we discussed earlier represent the father-child relationship. But some of the moiety relationships that were adopted represent the flesh relationship, because you might never know who your father is, but you always know who your mother is.
Of course, yeah.
And so a lot of tribes, and Howitt, to his credit, he said, look, I think the people in Gippsland must have given away the moiety system because they just don't operate. He said, except when they play football, they all line up in the proper moieties. So he noted, and he said at one stage, I forget what it was exactly he said, but it was something to do with the skin groups. He said, I did not understand what I was told, but what I was told was this. And when I read it, I understood what he was saying because it had that spirit-flesh relationship. And what I said before was the Mukjawaint and Batchawallak people adopted their moiety systems to represent the mother-child relationship. So they're actually,
said it was backwards.
It's back to front, yeah. And I ended up making sense with it when John Connolly gave the descriptions. It didn't make sense from the normal Chaparong spirit and flesh and skin or moiety relationships. But when I swapped it around to represent the flesh relationship, it made perfect sense.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I say this right. Mukjarawant people are a subgroup of the Wotjombalik.
Yeah.
and a part of a complex network of intricately interconnected indigenous communities of the Grampians region
Yes.
and what is now northwestern Victoria. The land of the Mukjarawant covered the area between Ararat,
Yes.
where Tom Wills' dad
Yes.
was, the Car Plains, the Richards River, Horsham, Rosebrook, and extending all the way back to the Grampians. John Connolly's testimonial was recorded by Howard, and he said that he took part in the game in the 1830s to 1840s. So this is before Tom was even there.
Yeah.
So to say that Indigenous people just copied the white man's game of
Which
football,
I've had people say to me.
yeah, well, you can see why they make that
Yeah.
distinction though, because of the mimicry and the amazing
Yes.
ability to do that.
Yes.
But this proves all of that wrong. And this is what he said. In playing a game at ball, which they kicked about, the different totems presented two different sides, and there were men and women on each side. For example, Garacha men and women against Warrant men and women. Johnny remembers that he, his mother, and her mother all played on the same side at ball. His cousin George played with the Warrant in the other side.
Yeah. Look, and what's important is that when John Connolly says his mother play, and that was the clue to me that allowed me to unravel what he was saying, because he was following the flesh relationship on his mother's side.
Yeah. I've got two more in here I put in as a surprise for you. This is the Tom Wills Monument in Moyston. Have you ever seen it?
Oh, yes,
You've
yes.
been there, yeah. It says on the monument, and this was commissioned by the AFL and written by the AFL's historian Cole Hutchison. He said, while playing as a child with Aboriginal children in this area, he developed a game which he later utilised in the formation of Australian football.
Yeah.
It's interestingly worded.
It
That
is.
statement. It's like he's trying to say that he got it from from playing with Indigenous children, but it's not saying that at the same time. It's a little bit strange for the AFL to commission this. So I'll read it again. While playing as a child with Aboriginal children in this area, he developed a game which he later utilised in the formation of Australian football.
Well, he's trying to say that he made a game up that the Aboriginal people used.
Sort of. It's really interestingly worded. I've never been able to pull it apart, but he's kind of implying that, but he's also implying the opposite, that he played with kids and then developed a game out of what he played.
Yes, I think that's what he's trying to say. But at that time, Gillian Hibbins had said it was a seductive myth and all this sort of thing.
Well,
I think
it wasn't actually, because it was 1998 that this was put in.
1998.
1998, yeah. Donated by the Australian Football League. So
right. Well, that was before.
It was before what the seductive myth. Yeah. The next piece of information I've got here is from an article written by Martin Flanagan, and he actually met a Wills descendant and had a chat to him. And this is what he said. It is at this point I need to digress and tell you about a meeting I had several years ago at the Melbourne Club with an elderly gentleman named Lawton Wills Cook. Lawton's grandfather, Horace Wills, was one of Tom Wills' younger brothers. After Tom committed suicide in 1880, Horace was one of the only few people to be recorded saying anything sympathetic or loving about him. Horace said Tom was a wild, reckless individual, but one of the best people he'd ever met, and that it was not in his nature to disappoint people. Horace Wills' daughter was Lawton Wills Cook's mother. She told Lawton, he told me, and I'm telling you, that Horace Wills said that when his brother Tom was a boy at Moyston outside Ararat, he played Aboriginal football with the local blacks. He also said they used a possum skin stuffed with charcoal and wrapped with sinew. With Lawton Wills by my side, I addressed the meeting of the Melbourne Club and told them as much. With Lawton by my side, I also said as much to the AGM of the Old Melburnians Football Club, calling them to bear witness to Lawton's testimony. So there's a direct Wills descendant who's saying that he did play with Indigenous kids.
It's impossible, in my view, that Tom Wills didn't play Marnbrook, because it was an institutional part of everyday life.
And knowing that he definitely saw corroborees, and if he saw corroborees, he
Yeah,
he's more than like it's almost certain that he saw some form of game playing,
of course.
and he had the weapons that they used to play the games with. We're going to get to the weapons in a minute.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so I think we've got a lot here to sort of get us into the. We're moving out of the hypothesis and we're starting to get to a theory now.
yeah. And look, people you say that if it's not written down, then it couldn't have happened. But you've got to look at total context. And Tom was adept at Aboriginal dances and games and all this sort of stuff. He, when he was in England at school, he had his artifacts shipped to him. You know, he was immersed in it, and he spoke the language fluently, and therefore he understood some of the deeper concepts that and he was able to relate to Aboriginal people. And to say that he wasn't exposed is just completely idiotic.
You can't say that it's certain, but I'd be comfortable saying that it is more than likely that he played it. And I know you'll say it's
Yeah,
certain, but yeah,
I'm
I
saying
know
it's
what the people are going to say. Yeah.
oh well, that's just inbuilt conservatism instead of looking at a total picture. And
But that's your doctoral thesis.
that's right. Yeah,
That's why you've sort of put this. I'm seeing
I'm
it. The
good at
more
joining dots.
you are, yeah, and it's part of your way of putting things together. I mean, even those parts of your job included doing that. So this is just a natural
Look,
part of
yeah, yeah, it's part of a total heuristic. It's a pattern, and and the whole right side of our brains is supposed to be to analyze patterns,
Mm.
and to understand. And so you can't look at Tom Wills or anybody else, and say this is just a number of simple things that joined up. It's a complex web of things which forms a total pattern. And Tom Wills, the evidence is overwhelming that he was completely immersed in Aboriginal culture and understood it, and that it was an everyday experience for him.
So he's 10 at that point in time when they moved there. So in 1846, he's 11 years old and he begins attending William Brickwood's school in Melbourne, where he lives with Horatio's brother Tom, who he was named after. But do we think he would have gone home on the school holidays? I mean,
Absolutely.
It's a long way. Like how long would that be in a horse and cart back in the day?
I don't know. I suppose it might be
Takes
a
me
matter
3
of
hours
days.
to get there in my car.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So in September, he played cricket for the first time at the foot of Batman's Hill. He went out for a duck in both innings. This was played at the original site of the MCG, which was later moved to make room for Spencer Street Station.
Well, to answer your previous question, I was just thinking,
Yeah.
when Tom went away to rugby school, Aboriginal people came and said, "Where's Tom?" and wanted to look at his photo. Why would they do that unless he had maintained constant contact and been a part of their lives, an ongoing part of their lives? If he'd just gone to school and been a boarder and never come home,
Yeah.
they would have long since gone. But so the fact that they asked for him when he went to rugby meant that he must have been coming home all the time when he was at primary school.
Yeah. So 1846 to 1849, we don't know too much. We just know that when he turns 14, his schooling in Melbourne has ended and his family has grown to include his brothers Cedric, Horace, and Egbert. Now, you have a bit of a story with Egbert. Do you want to tell that one?
Well, one of Egbert's descendants, Arthur Wills, who's probably 10 or 15 years older than me, so that means he's well into his 90s now.
Yep.
Maybe even older. He was going into a nursing home and had all these artifacts, and he happened to bump into somebody who knew me, and so he just gave me all his artifacts that had been handed down.
Because was he trying to give them to an op shop or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. One of my students from the U3A worked as a volunteer in the op shop, and she said, "Oh, I know." He said, "I've got all these artifacts." He said, "I know who would want them, and he knew my name once he heard it because of the connection with Marngrook.
Yeah. Do you want to show the people what he gave you?
Yeah. First of all, this is a bull roarer, which you whirl around and makes a roaring sound. And it's got some interesting decorations on it. It's done in typical Southeast Australian art with geometric lines. And the squares and triangles there actually represent the skin groups. But I think the whole motif is supposed to be an eel, but I'm not sure. But anyway, you can see the age of that.
Yeah. Whoa. Yeah, it's really old.
And this is a woomera, of course, with a bit of shell that's been glued here. It's interesting that the glue that Aboriginal people make.
Oh, this is amazing. This is like natural super glue. You've told me about
yeah,
this before.
it's like you get the glue from the grass tree, which is the strongest known glue to mankind, and they used to use it to fasten the shells from the guns on warships, and the only way you could break the glue was to fire the shell. But also, Aboriginal people used to burn shellfish to make lime, which is the basis of cement. And they used to mix the glue not only and would set it to as a form of concrete. So I think that this the handle of
you may have to hold it up just a little bit to be able to see the glue. Flip it up the other way and just put the glue near the microphone. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And that I think is made from grass tree glue and shellfish cement.
These are they look like mini palm trees, but then the grass goes there and they get a big spire.
They used to be called black boys, but that's politically unacceptable now.
That's what my nana calls them. We had them growing all over our property in Ngambia as a kid.
Yeah, when in the distance they looked like an Aboriginal boy with a spear.
Yeah, I can see what. Yeah.
And this here is a possum's tooth, which is also fixed to the end, which goes into the slot. And this is an Australian invention, as far as I'm aware, used to extend the arm so that Aboriginal people can throw spears 100 metres or more. I've seen tribal guys, 3 tribal guys, throw spears so that they all ended up like a picket fence at the other end of a football oval. They could throw exactly the same distance on command.
Wow.
So, this is, as I say, an Australian invention to cater for the open, spaces where you need more distance. This is a husband persuader. It's a woman's digging stick and waddy. Used also for belting small rodents on the head and all that sort of stuff.
Would this been one of the things that when they were getting the ducks and stuff like that, they would have used?
Yes, that's one of the things that they used to do was they'd dig a hole in the side of the bank where the soil was wet, and so they'd hollow it out, get some worms that they dug up, break the worms up, and put them in a line into the hole. And then they'd go and sit behind a tree, and a duck would come up and say, "Oh, worms, love worms," and it'd keep eating the worms and go into the hole. And then it finds out something it never knew: ducks can't walk backwards. So it'd just sit there waiting. And the person would come home, more Kentucky Fried Duck for dinner.
Cool. Okay, so that's a digging stick. We've got the warmer.
Yeah.
And what did you call the other one? Sorry, the one that you bull roarer.
The bull roarer.
Yeah.
This is a boomerang with a large turning circle, because how sharp the angle is determines how quickly the boomerang turns. And what you do to make it turn is you slice off a bit of the side so that each time it turns, it cuts into the air at a slightly different angle, and keeps, as it rotates, it turns round. So that one...
That's like a hunting one, that one, yeah?
Well, yeah, that's right. It would be bringing down flying birds and things like that. And now this, it's got a sharper angle, so this turns a lot quicker, and it's got the clearly scalloped edge to
Yeah.
aid that turning process. And so this is the sort of boomerang that would have been used for when my great-grandfather Tom was taken duck hunting, so the ducks were looking up, thinking, I wonder if this is a hawk or an eagle come to get me.
Yeah.
So
Would they have thrown those into the big packs of birds in the sky as
yes, they
well?
often did. These are often more the ones to take the birds out of the sky,
Ah, okay, yep.
and these are the ones to hypnotise the ducks on the
It's funny because
pond.
my introduction to the boomerang was Mad Max 2.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, the metal boomerang that the little boy had in that movie.
Yeah.
He threw it. Yeah.
A lot of the boomerangs they had, of course, the heavy war boomerangs were sharp along there and could give vicious wounds, and they could throw them a long way.
I've seen the big ones. Our Indigenous coordinator at school, Robbie, he calls it the number 7. It looks like a giant number 7. I was like, what do you use that for, mate? And he's like,
yes.
take out the legs of an emu.
Yeah, that's right. They were actually also like scimitars. You could fight with them, and they'd practically take slices off you.
Yeah, they would. Yeah. Which kind of happens towards the end of the Wills story.
These were all the artefacts that Arthur Wills had inherited, and he gave to me, and I feel very proud that the Wills family has trusted me with their artefacts.
Yeah. So you obviously met him when you got them, or he was
no,
already in the nursing
I never
home?
did. I tried, and I couldn't find the nursing home he'd gone to.
It was because he's just a random person thing.
Yeah.
You've also got some a box of trinkets there. What's in there?
Oh well, there's various things like an axe head and an arrow head. Well, these are flakes chipped off to scour skin and clean it.
Yeah.
What else was there? Oh, this is unbelievable. This is glass that Aboriginal people used and shaped into a spearhead. You can see that they would have then glued into the top of the spear to use it. It's amazing.
And on the little note cards there, I just noticed it says Egbert's name.
Yes,
Wentworth
Wills.
What does it say on the card?
Oh, Aboriginal spearheads made from glass, Culinaringo, which was where the Wills family were massacred at Springsure.
Yep.
It was from Egbert S. Wills. Aboriginal scrapers and shell openers. Okay, that is to open shellfish. Just leave her open.
It's like a
which
knife.
would a staple part of the Aboriginal diet. This actually comes from Tasmania.
Oh, okay. So it's sort of a collection they must have had.
Yeah. But they're the two glass spearheads that were made.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Well,
it's great that you have a piece of the Wills history.
It is. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
The trouble is, who will I give them to when I die?
Well, I'm sure you've got a son or a daughter who'd love it.
Yes, of course, is the Marn Grook.